It's funny how different words have different meanings for some people. For example, if someone says you really need to go to AA, do they mean Automobile Association? Or when someone says CPT, Cape Town Captain? Now, for the longest time, whenever someone said the word M16, I thought of this. But now ASUS has got me thinking this. The M16 rifle was a staple diet for the US Army for quite a few years. Why? Because it was reliable, it didn't jam as much, and it handled heat well. So, this is not too dissimilar from a laptop in which it needs to be able to handle heat, it needs to perform when you need it to perform. So thank you so much to EveTech for sending me the ROG Zephyrus M16 for us to be able to review today. And as is normal, we're going to be looking over those aspects like heat, performance, design, specifications, and how those things stack up holistically to bring us this laptop and how it performs. So as is normal, we're going to be looking at this unit a little. So let's start off with design. Now, the first thing that we're introduced to in typical ROG style is a massive wow factor. Now, look what happens when you open this panel. You are seeing this beautiful reflection, this rainbow-like reflection that you don't actually get to enjoy. It's more for the person sitting opposite you, but it's a real statement from ROG, and it's a beautiful look for this laptop to have that nice reflective rainbow panel. Next, staying on the lid. Now, ASUS started this with their Zen range, but they've introduced this, and this is not the first laptop too, but you can see just how thin these bezels are on the side. I would estimate to be just over 2 millimeters. Obviously going to be thicker on top because it has to accommodate both a microphone as well as a camera, and at the bottom not really noticeable, which we'll get to shortly. Next, the keyboard. So this keyboard has got curved keys, which makes typing a lot easier because it concaves to your fingers, which allows you to get around the keys a lot better, which leads to less typing errors. But more importantly is that it's got 1.7 millimeter keystroke registration. ASUS have put in what's called overstroke technology. Now, overstroke, and I've tested this and it's true, is before you reach the full 1.7 millimeters of actuation distance, the keystroke has already been registered. So that means that you don't have to press the key all the way before your keystroke is registered, especially in gaming. Now, the tracker pad is massive, which is awesome when you're using the tracker pad maybe on a flight or where you can't use a mouse. But I really like that, by the way. But the one concern I had about this is that this is going to get in the way of gaming because my thumb is definitely going to rest on this when I'm playing games, and that's going to affect with the mouse. But with a simple function F10, you are able to turn this tracker pad off and use solely the mouse that you have plugged in. Lastly, even the on-off button is a fingerprint reader. Really awesome part about this laptop is that it charges in 2 different ways. For your average gaming, you have a 240 watt brick that comes with the laptop for obviously any kind of high output work that you're doing, gaming, designing, and that kind of thing. Next, if you're traveling, you have a 100 watt brick, which is obviously smaller and lighter, so that charges via USB-C and not your typical DCI in. So that I was massively impressed by. But the one thing where it did become slightly irritating is that if you look at this laptop, the DC power in is halfway, which is not so bad considering it's going on a desk, but the USB-C charger sits pretty much right in front. Now, I can't hate on ASUS too much because of a great job done with the thermals, and they've literally left themselves no space to be able to put it in there. Next, we're going to be talking about Lift hinge as well as the thermal solution. Now, the reason for that is because they go hand in hand. Lift hinge, especially on this laptop, is not just a marketing gimmick. If I take the lid of this laptop and I get to a certain point where the base of the screen monitor here starts to touch the desk, you'll see that the base of the laptop is starting to lift up. hence ergolift. Now, that creates a small gap at the base of the laptop, and that is important because air will be allowed to be taken in from underneath, and that's where the two intake fans sit. Now, those two intake fans will take air from, they're actually 84 blades if I didn't mention that, but they'll take air and then expel through the sides and the back. Now, there's two expelling vents on the sides and then two at the back. The one concern that I did have is that the base of the monitor or the lid sits so close to the back vents that I thought this is going to heat up the screen. But if you look closely, you'll actually see that all of these back vents are angled at a right angle, so that as soon as the air comes out, it's all going in one direction and not feeding into each other, or not flat, so that the air has basically got a choke point. Then is the actual thermal solution within inside the laptop. So as you can see, I'll bring it up in front of you. Connected to these two fans is actually 6 pipes that connect to both the GPU as well as the CPU. Now, the most important factor of this, and something that's very understated by a lot of reviews that I see out there, is this has got liquid metal technology, and it actually is exactly that. It's a liquid metal rather than using a thermal paste solution. Now, thermal paste is basically just silicone grease, whereas liquid metal is liquid metal. So this has between 6 and 12 times the thermal conductivity that a thermal paste does. So what it does is it fills up the little pores, but they actually create, and I'll bring up a video that you can see, is pores are filled up, but it creates a nice medium between the heat plates from the cooling system as well as the heat plate from the GPU and the CPU. Talking about the design overall, I think ASUS have done a phenomenal job in being able to create a laptop that is not too ostentatious, in-your-face aggressive. This laptop is sleek, it's sturdy, robust, it's got everything that you're able to take it to work. Yes, the rainbow effect might be a bit much for someone sitting opposite you, but most of us would work in a cubicle or an office. So you do have the ability to work. You have the ability to travel with it. You have the ability to game on it. It literally lends itself to any type of person doing any type of thing. It's a 16-inch, which means the dimensions are small, and it weighs in at only 1.9 kilograms. And you'll be massively impressed by that when we actually go through the specs next. So overall on the design, I was really impressed. Let's talk about specs. And the first spec that we're going to speak about is the CPU. Now, this is a i7. These laptops can go up to i9, but this is the i7-11800H, which is an 8-core 16-thread processor that has a 24 meg cache. But I've done reviews on quite a few laptops that have this processor, and it's a nice, strong gaming processor that can handle very high-end games. But one of the cool features that I always mention is that it does have Intel Graphics Command Center that has the ability to stream as well as record gameplay at the same time using the same laptop. This has a 3070 8 gigs of GDDR6, but there are versions of this laptop with a 3050 Ti as well as a 3060. Now, with this 3070, we are able to handle quite high-end games as well. Moving on from that, we go to our RAM. Now, this has 16 gigs of DDR4 at 3200 megahertz, which is again CL22, so not that great on the CL latency, but really good on the frequency, which is exactly what the requirement from Intel is. Now, one of the times that I'm really glad that I do all my testing is that without even advertising it, ROG is stuck what I can only believe to be some form of high-end Evo from Samsung that did just over 7,000 on read and 5,200 on write. So massive speeds coming out from the NVMe there. Now let's talk about the display, and it is awesome. Because it's a 16-inch, it's going to have a different aspect ratio. Now it has a 2560 by 1600, which means a 16 by 10 ratio rather than a 16 by 9 ratio QHD. Now, on this QHD, it is 165 Hz with a 3 millisecond gray-to-gray response. It is an IPS level display, and most importantly for designers, it is Pantone validated. Moving on to the camera, and slight disappointment again, it's a 720p with 0.9 megapixels. Now, let me state the reason why I am always disappointed with the camera, because this laptop is basically perfect in every single spec. However, if it had a 1080p with 5 megapixels, then all of a sudden it can be a laptop that you can do streaming on the go for those people that want to content create going anywhere without having to use an external camera. The audio clarity on reception, now this has AI noise cancelling, which I'll be honest, I didn't have that much time to test, but the audio reception is quite clear, especially for any audio or video type conferencing. Now the audio is impressive on paper, where it says that it's got 4x2 watt woofers and 2x2 watt tweeters that are all tuned by Dolby Atmos, but honestly didn't feel it with regards to loudness. The sound was clear, but it just wasn't very loud, but doubt it's going to cause any issues as most people are going to be gaming with headphones. Now on connectivity, it is a Wi-Fi 6 as well as Bluetooth 5.2, so connection is very up there with the best that you can currently get. Lastly on specs, the battery. Now it is a 90 watt hours 4-cell lithium ion battery that met and beat my expectations. Without fiddling with any of the battery settings, it did last just over 4 hours, so that was while streaming DSTV and that kind of thing. Okay, performance, rubber hitting road again. Now, I obviously did the same where I tested quite a few programs and benchmarks to see how this laptop performed, as well as played 2 games, that being the ever-bricking New World as well as Deathloop. So we are going to tune in to see how these things went, and we'll start off with the benchmarks.
So on Cinebench R23, did extremely well on single core performance, and as you can see, and most notably, it hit the 1492, which is a benchmark of CPU Monkey. It hit it on the dot, which is an indication of build quality. On multi-core performance on Cinebench R23, faring a little bit better than the last time I tested it. Still doing okay-ish, not quite tops, but is on multi-core beating some desktop level CPUs, which it would considering it has 8 cores. So in PC Mark that fully tests every aspect of the laptop, it did phenomenally well, and we'll do the comparatives just now. Looking at the temperatures, it had a median of about 62 degrees on the CPU and GPU, which is phenomenal throughout the test, and only peaking when it was doing a rendering test of a 92 on the CPU and 94 on the GPU, but there is an explanation for that a little bit later. As you can see, final result, a 7002, smashing it out of the park, and actually the highest result that I have achieved with a notebook. That has compared with desktop gaming level PCs of 2020, beating normal gaming PCs and being just under high-end gaming PCs. 3D Mark also doing well, getting a score of a 9164, which we'll compare at the end. The median temperatures were around about 75 degrees throughout the test, reaching a peak of 84 on the CPU and 85 on the GPU. Again, not that bad actually, but it could have been lower, and again, I'll explain it just now. Final result looking scored just under a 2020 gaming PC, and that is comparing something with a 3700X as well as an RX 5700 XT. So against desktop level, that is a great score.
Now let's see how it did in Deathloop.
As you can see, Deathloop set to ultra settings in QHD. Now, it performed relatively well, hitting anything between 68 and 75 frames per second. Now, thermal throttling was noticed with 91 degrees on the CPU as a high and 82.6 degrees on the GPU.
Now, let's see how it did in New World.
So same thing here, high settings in QHD, averaging around about 60 frames per second, nice and smooth gameplay. Now, when it comes to the temperatures, CPU on a 94 and GPU on an 87, so a tad bit high, considering T-junction for the CPU is 100 degrees.
Now, these temperatures only tell half the story. Now, there is a function to be able to go turbo. Now, this is one thing that I think ASUS can fix quite easily with a software update, in that as soon as I enacted turbo, those temperatures dropped from where you saw them to what's in front of you now. And that is about a 10 degrees drop, and that's when the fan was spinning at its full RPMs. Now you can set the fan curves to full RPMs, but that does require an overclock, which I didn't want to do for safety purposes. purposes, but it's just one thing where I would like to see ASUS being able to include having the fans go at 100%, because the difference on gameplay was phenomenal, and it just shows that this laptop is able to get lowest
temperatures
at a native QHD. Okay guys, time to conclude, and we'll conclude holistically. This laptop is near perfect. It has got everything from specs, performance, looks. It's awesome. However, there's 3 things I would like to see changed. 1, that camera needs to be changed from a 720 to a 1080. Secondly, I would like to see software or an update that allows you to control your fans at 100%, because we know what the thermals are capable of, and I think it's doing a disservice to this laptop by not having that function. And third is it does take grease, like your fingers, it does tend to get dirty really quickly, which is more of an irritation and something that's quite easily manageable by washing one's hands, but it does get dirty quite quickly. But otherwise, it is completely perfect. It retails for $3,200 in South Africa for $45,499, around about there. I do believe that it is literally overpriced by maybe 1,000 or 500 Rand, there and thereabouts. But if those changes came, it is a steal, and that would probably be a good indication as to why it sold out pretty much everywhere I looked. Guys, I really hope you enjoyed this review. I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Have an awesome time wherever you are. Cheers. Goodbye.